Security, we have a situation on the 42nd floor. The voice crackled through David Chen's earpiece as he stared at the two young faces on his office monitor. Faces that carried his wife's gentle eyes and his own stubborn chin. After 6 years of running from the biggest mistake of his life, his past had finally found him. Welcome back to the stories that matter, the ones that break your heart and put it back together again. If you're here for real emotion and life-changing moments, subscribe now because tomorrow's story will absolutely blow your mind. And I want to know, drop a comment telling me, where are you watching from? And could you forgive someone who abandoned you for years? Let's dive in. The glass elevator climbed toward the clouds, carrying twins Emma and Ethan Morrison to the 42nd floor of Chen Industries. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her blazer, the nicest thing she owned, bought with money saved from her weekend job at the campus bookstore. Beside her, Ethan stood rigid, his jaw clenched the way it always got when he was fighting back tears. "You sure about this?" Ethan whispered, watching the floor numbers climb. 28, 29, 30. Emma squeezed his hand. "We've waited 6 years for answers, Ethan. I'm not backing down now." Through the elevator's glass walls, they could see the Seattle skyline stretching endlessly, a world of wealth and power that felt as foreign to them as another planet. Their mother's old Honda was parked 17 floors below in visitor parking, probably the oldest car in the entire garage. 38, 39, 40. "What if he won't see us?" Ethan's voice cracked slightly. At 22, he was still the little boy who used to ask Mom why Daddy never came home. "Then we'll make him see us." The elevator chimed softly. 42. Meanwhile, 6 floors above in the executive suite, David Chen sat behind a mahogany desk worth more than most people's cars, staring at quarterly reports that blurred together like meaningless numbers. At 45, he commanded a tech empire worth billions, employed 12,000 people across 4 continents, and owned homes in 3 countries. But he couldn't sleep. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed. Really laughed. Everything felt hollow, like living inside an expensive painting. His assistant's voice buzzed through the intercom. "Mr. Chen, there are 2 young people here requesting to see you. They claim to be family." David's coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor. The dark liquid spread like spilled secrets across the pristine surface. He knew. Somehow, without seeing them, without hearing their names, he knew exactly who was downstairs. "Security," he managed to say, his voice barely steady. "Have security escort them out." "Sir, they're very insistent. The young woman, she has your wife's eyes." David's breath caught. Had. His wife's eyes. Because Linda was gone now, had been for 2 years. Cancer had taken her while he was building his empire, while he was running from the choice he'd made 6 years ago. The choice that haunted every successful day since. He moved to the massive windows overlooking the city, pressing his palm against the cool glass. Somewhere down there were his children, who had grown up without him, who had buried their mother without him, who had probably learned to hate him with the same intensity he'd once used to chase his ambitions. "Mr. Chen," his assistant's voice was gentler now. "What should I tell them?" David closed his eyes and saw Linda's face the day he'd told her he was leaving. "Choose them or choose your dreams, David. But don't you dare choose both and fail them like your father failed you." He'd chosen his dreams, and now his dreams felt like sand slipping through his fingers. What would you do if the children you abandoned showed up at your workplace after 6 years? Would you face them or run again? "Send them up," he whispered. The response came immediately. "I'm sorry, sir? Could you repeat that?" David straightened his tie, smoothed his hair, and tried to prepare for the conversation that would either destroy him completely or give him a chance at the only thing that had ever really mattered. "Send them up." The elevator doors opened with a soft whisper, releasing Emma and Ethan into a world of marble and mahogany that smelled like expensive cologne and old money. Emma's sneakers, her only pair, squeaked against the polished floor as they approached the reception desk. "Emma and Ethan Morrison," Emma announced, her voice stronger than she felt. "We're here to see David Chen." The receptionist, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, studied them for a long moment. "He's expecting you. Last door at the end of the hall." Their footsteps echoed in the corridor like a countdown. Emma could hear Ethan's breathing, shallow and quick. Her own heart hammered against her ribs so hard she wondered if he could hear it too. The nameplate on the door read, David Chen, Chief Executive Officer. Emma raised her hand to knock, then froze. Through the glass panels she could see him, a tall man in an expensive suit, standing with his back to the door, staring out at the city. His hair was graying at the temples now, and his shoulders seemed to carry the weight of mountains. "He looks," Ethan started, then stopped. "Older," Emma finished. "He looks older." She knocked, 3 sharp raps that seemed to shatter the silence. "Come in." The voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened by years and cigarettes he'd probably quit. Emma turned the handle and stepped into the largest office she'd ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows, art that probably cost more than their apartment's rent for a year, a desk that could serve dinner for 8, and there he was, David Chen, their father. He turned slowly, and Emma felt the air leave her lungs. It was like looking into a masculine version of her own face. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same way of standing with one shoulder slightly higher than the other when nervous. For 10 seconds, that felt like 10 years. Nobody spoke. "Dad?" Ethan's voice broke the silence like a stone through glass. The word hung in the air between them, fragile and dangerous. David's composure cracked visibly. His hand gripped the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles went white. You're so tall," he whispered, then immediately looked embarrassed by the inadequacy of his words. "6 years will do that," Emma said, and her voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "People grow. They change. They learn to live without the people who are supposed to love them." The words hit their target. David flinched as if she'd slapped him. "Emma," Ethan warned softly, but she was just getting started. "Do you know what today is?" she asked, taking a step closer. The marble felt solid beneath her feet, grounding her. "It's Mom's birthday. Would have been her birthday. She's been dead for 2 years and you didn't even know." David's face went ashen. "Linda's dead." "Cancer," Ethan said quietly. "Pancreatic. She fought for 8 months. We held her hands while she died, Dad. We buried her in a grave you'll never visit because you don't even know where it is." The silence that followed was deafening. David sank into his chair as if his legs had forgotten how to hold him. His empire, his billions, his success. None of it mattered now. None of it could bring back the woman he'd loved and lost twice. "I didn't know," he whispered. I should have known." "You should have been there," Emma said, and tears she'd been holding back for years finally broke free. "She called your name when the morphine made her confused. Even at the end, even after everything, she still loved you. And you weren't there." David stood abruptly, moving to the windows as if the view could somehow save him. His reflection stared back, a successful man who'd failed at the only thing that mattered. "I thought about calling," he said to the glass. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every time I saw children laughing in the park. I picked up the phone 1,000 times. "But you never dialed," Ethan said. There was no anger in his voice now, only a bone-deep sadness that somehow hurt worse than rage. "I was ashamed." David's voice was barely audible. "I chose this." He gestured at the office, the view, the trappings of success. "Over you, over her. How do you call your children and explain that you picked money over their bedtime stories? That you traded their hugs for board meetings?" Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "You don't explain it. You just try to fix it." David turned, and for the first time since they'd entered, he really looked at them. Emma, fierce and beautiful, with Linda's compassion hiding behind walls of hurt. Ethan, gentle and strong, carrying pain like a weight he'd learned to bear. His children, strangers who shared his blood and his ex-wife's heart. "I don't know how," he admitted. "I don't know how to fix what I broke." Maybe, Emma said softly, you start by saying you're sorry. The words hung in the air like a challenge, like hope, like the first note of a song that could either heal or destroy what was left of a family that had been fractured for too long. What should a father's first words be to the children he abandoned? Can some wounds ever truly heal? The apology hung unspoken in the air like smoke, visible but untouchable. David opened his mouth and closed it again. The words, 3 simple words that could begin to bridge 6 years of silence, seemed impossibly heavy on his tongue. Sorry doesn't bring her back, Emma said, filling the silence with steel. She crossed her arms, rebuilding the walls that had cracked moments before. Sorry doesn't pay for the funeral we couldn't afford. Sorry doesn't explain to a 12-year-old why daddy doesn't love him anymore. David's phone buzzed against his desk, then buzzed again. The red light blinked insistently. Urgent calls, board meetings, the empire that never slept demanding his attention even now. I need to... He reached for the phone automatically, the motion as natural as breathing. Years of conditioning, of choosing work over everything else. Take it, Ethan said quietly, but his voice carried a dangerous undertone. Go ahead, Dad. Show us what's more important than this conversation. David's hand froze above the device. The red light continued blinking, urgent and demanding, but for the first time in years he let it flash. The company needed me, he said instead, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. 12,000 employees depending on decisions I made every day. Shareholders, investors, people trusted me with their futures. What about our futures? Emma's laugh was bitter as winter wind. What about trusting you to walk us to school, or help with homework, or show up to just one, of Ethan's baseball games? You played baseball? David asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Ethan's face hardened. I was team captain my senior year, full scholarship to Washington State, but you wouldn't know that, would you? The building seemed to pulse around them, alive with the heartbeat of commerce. Somewhere below, elevators carried people to meetings that felt urgent, to deals that seemed life-changing, to the 1,000 small betrayals that successful people told themselves were necessary. I sent money, David said, grasping for justification. Every month. Child support, college funds, medical insurance. I made sure you were provided for. We never saw a dime of it, Emma said flatly. David's carefully constructed rationalization crumbled. What? Mom was too proud to cash the checks. They're still in a shoebox in her closet. All of them. 6 years worth of guilt money she couldn't bring herself to spend. The silence stretched between them like a canyon. David's phone buzzed again, his assistant probably wondering why he wasn't answering, his board probably panicking about the Hong Kong deal, his whole perfectly ordered world demanding his attention. She kept them, he whispered, along with every card you never sent and every call you never made, Ethan said. She kept a record of your absence, Dad, like evidence. Emma moved toward the windows, putting distance between herself and the conversation. The city spread out below, millions of people living their lives, loving their families, making choices that mattered. We shouldn't have come here, she said to the glass. This was a mistake. Emma, no! Ethan started, but she was already heading toward the door. Why? She turned back, her eyes blazing. So we can listen to him explain why building his empire was more important than raising his children? So we can pretend that money could replace a father? David stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Emma's voice rose, echoing off the marble and mahogany. Tell us, Dad, what was so important that you walked away from everything that should have mattered? The question hung in the air like a challenge. David's mouth opened, closed, opened again. How could he explain the fear that had driven him, the terror of ending up like his own father, broke, bitter, and broken? How could he make them understand that every success had felt like protection, every dollar like insurance against the poverty that had defined his childhood? I was afraid, he said finally, the words barely audible. Of what? Ethan asked. Of failing you the way my father failed me. Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. So instead you chose not to try at all. David's office door opened and his assistant appeared. a woman in her 50s with the harried expression of someone managing a crisis. "Mr. Chen, the Tokyo markets are opening, and the Yamamoto deal—" "Not now, Patricia," David said without looking away from his children. "But sir, they're threatening to walk if—" "I said not now." Patricia's eyes widened. In 15 years of working for David Chen, she'd never heard him postpone a deal, never seen him prioritize anything over business. She backed out quickly, closing the door behind her. The interruption had broken something fragile that was forming between them. Emma's face hardened again, walls slamming back into place. "There it is," she said coldly. "Your real-life calling. The life that matters. That's not—" "We should go," she told Ethan. "We got our answer. We're still not important enough." But as she reached for the door handle, Ethan spoke up, his voice steady and determined. "No." Emma turned. "Ethan?" "No," he repeated, moving to block her path. "We came here for a reason, Em. We came here because Mom asked us to." The words stopped everyone cold. David's breath caught. Emma's hand fell from the door handle. "What did you say?" David whispered. Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but his voice stayed strong. "Before she died, Mom made us promise. She said we couldn't hate you forever. She said everyone deserves a chance to make things right, even if they don't deserve forgiveness." The weight of Linda's final gift, grace from beyond the grave, settled over the room like snow, quiet and transforming. The mention of Linda's dying wish settled over the office like a heavy blanket, making the air itself feel thicker. Emma stood frozen by the door, her hands still reaching for the handle that might as well have been on another planet. "She said that?" David's voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter this fragile revelation. Ethan nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Her exact words were, "Your father is lost, not evil. Promise me you'll try to help him find his way home." Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle's sky had darkened ominously. What had been a clear morning was rapidly becoming something more threatening. Rain began to streak the glass in heavy sheets, and the wind howled around the building's corners with increasing intensity. Patricia's voice crackled through the intercom, urgent and apologetic. "Mr. Chen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but building security has issued a weather advisory. There's a severe storm system moving through. All non-essential personnel are being asked to shelter in place until it passes." David pressed the response button, his eyes never leaving his children. "How long?" "Weather service is saying at least 3 hours, sir. Possibly longer. The parking garage is flooding, and several roads are already impassable." Emma finally turned from the door, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Perfect. Even the weather wants us to work this out." But there was something else in her voice now. Beneath the sarcasm, a tremor that suggested she was as scared of leaving as she was of staying. The office felt different now that escape wasn't an option. Smaller somehow, despite its vast size. More intimate. The storm outside created a cocoon of isolation, cutting them off from the world beyond these walls. David moved away from his desk, settling into one of the leather chairs arranged around a small conference table in the corner. It was the closest thing to neutral ground the room offered. 3 hours, he said, more to himself than to them. "We could sit in silence for 3 hours, Emma suggested, but she didn't move toward the door. Instead, she walked to the windows, watching the rain paint abstract patterns on the glass. "We could," Ethan agreed, settling into the chair across from his father, "but that's not what Mom would have wanted." The storm intensified, lightning illuminating the office in stark white flashes. The building's lights flickered once, twice, then settled. In the momentary darkness, they were just 3 people sharing space and secrets, stripped of pretense by nature's intervention. "Tell me about her," David said suddenly. About how she died." Emma's shoulders tensed. "You don't get to—" "Please." The word broke from him like a prayer. "I know I don't deserve to know, but she was everything good in my life, and I threw it away. I need to know how her story ended." Ethan and Emma exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations that twins had perfected over 22 years of shared experience. "She was brave," Ethan said finally. Even when the chemo made her sick, even when she could barely stand, she kept working. 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to make sure we could stay in college. She never complained, Emma added, her voice softer now. Not once. Not about the pain, not about the bills, not about being alone. But sometimes I'd catch her looking at old photos, and her face would just break. David's hands clenched in his lap. Photos of what? Of us, Emma said. When we were little, when we were a family. The rain hammered against the windows with renewed fury, as if the storm was echoing the emotion building inside the office. The city below had disappeared behind sheets of water, leaving them suspended between earth and sky in their glass tower. She kept them? David asked. On her nightstand, Ethan confirmed, right next to her medicine. Every morning when she woke up, and every night before she went to sleep. Those pictures were the first and last things she saw. David stood abruptly, moving to stare out at the storm. His reflection in the glass looked haunted, older than his 45 years. I have dreams, he said quietly. Every night for 6 years. Dreams where I come home and you're still small, and Linda's making dinner, and everything is the way it should be. I wake up and for just a moment I forget. I think I'm going to see you at breakfast. Emma turned from her own window, studying her father's profile. Do you ever dream about Mom being sick? No, David said, his voice thick. In my dreams, she's always healthy, always laughing. I think my mind won't let me imagine her suffering. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Outside the storm raged, but inside something was shifting. The forced proximity was doing what anger and accusations couldn't. It was wearing down the walls they'd all built, revealing the people underneath. She laughed a lot, actually, Emma said, surprising herself with the admission. Even at the end, she said laughter was free medicine. She used to laugh at my jokes, David remembered, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. Even the terrible ones, especially the terrible ones. She still did that, Ethan said. With us. She'd tell us your old jokes sometimes, when we were kids. We didn't know they were yours then. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was getting stronger, as if nature itself was determined to keep them trapped together until something resolved. The building creaked and swayed slightly, barely perceptible, but enough to remind them that they were at the mercy of forces beyond their control. What was her favorite? David asked. Her favorite what? Joke. What was her favorite joke of mine? Emma and Ethan looked at each other again, and for the first time since entering the office, they both smiled. The one about the duck, they said in unison. When forced to spend time with someone who hurt you, what emotions surface first? Anger or the love that's been buried underneath? The duck joke, David repeated, and despite everything, the years, the pain, the storm raging outside, he actually chuckled. I can't believe she remembered that ridiculous thing. She said it was the first time you ever made her laugh, Emma said, settling into the chair beside Ethan for the first time since they'd arrived. The storm had made their hostility feel pointless, exhausting. Tell it, Ethan said quietly. David looked at them both, these children who were strangers, these strangers who were his blood. You want to hear a bad joke from a man who abandoned you? We want to hear Mom's favorite joke, Emma corrected. There's a difference. The distinction mattered more than David had expected. He cleared his throat, feeling ridiculous and grateful all at once. What do you call a duck that gets all A's? Ethan groaned. Emma rolled her eyes, but they were both smiling. A wise quacker, David finished, and for a moment, just a moment, the office felt less like a corporate fortress and more like a family reunion. It's terrible, Emma laughed despite herself. It's worse than terrible, Ethan agreed. It's so bad it's actually good, David finished. That's what your mother said. She said only a man secure in his stupidity would tell a joke that bad with complete confidence. The laughter faded, but something warmer remained. The storm continued its assault on the building, but inside, the forced intimacy was working its magic, wearing down defenses like water on stone. Why did you really leave? Emma asked suddenly. The question had been building behind her words all morning, and now it spilled out, stark and unavoidable. David's expression shifted, the brief levity evaporating. He moved to his desk, not to answer the phone this time, but to open the bottom drawer. From it, he withdrew a small, battered photograph, edges worn soft from handling. "Because of this," he said, placing it on the table between them. Emma leaned forward, Ethan beside her. The photo showed a man in work clothes, thin and tired looking, standing beside a beat-up truck. He was maybe 30, with David's eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. "My father," David said, "Thomas Chen. He worked at construction until his back gave out, then drove delivery trucks until the company downsized. He died at 52, broken, bitter, convinced he'd failed everyone who ever counted on him." Ethan touched the edge of the photo gently. "You look like him." "I spent my whole childhood watching him try and fail to provide for us, watching my mother take in sewing to pay the rent, eating beans and rice for weeks because that's all we could afford." David's voice was steady, but his hands weren't. "When I was 12, I found him crying in our kitchen at 2 in the morning because he couldn't afford to fix my mother's glasses." Emma's expression softened despite herself. "Dad." "I swore I'd never be him," David continued. "I swore I'd never put a family through that kind of uncertainty, that poverty, that shame. So I worked. Scholarships through college, 18-hour days building the company. Every success felt like armor against ending up like him." The storm outside seemed to echo the turbulence in David's voice. Lightning flashed, throwing stark shadows across the office walls. "But when you were born," he said, looking directly at them now, "when I held you both for the first time, I realized I was terrified of a different kind of failure. What if I couldn't provide for you the way you deserved? What if the company failed? What if I ended up like my father, broken and useless?" "So you chose to leave before you could fail," Ethan said, understanding dawning in his voice. "I thought if I built something big enough, secure enough, I could come back when it was safe. When I knew I could give you everything." David's laugh was hollow. "I was going to come back when you turned 18, when college was paid for, when your futures were guaranteed." "But you never did," Emma said. "By then, it had been too long. You were strangers. And Linda ... His voice broke slightly. "Linda had built a life without me, a good life. How could I walk back in and disrupt that? How could I prove I'd changed when every day I stayed away proved I hadn't?" The silence that followed was different from the angry silences earlier. This one was heavy with understanding, with the weight of choices made from fear rather than malice. "You know what the worst part is?" Emma said finally. "We would have been happy with beans and rice. We would have been happy in a one-bedroom apartment if it meant having a dad who came home at night." The words hit David like physical blows. "I know that now." "Do you?" Ethan challenged. "Because even now, even sitting here talking about this, you've looked at your phone 6 times. Even now, part of you is thinking about the deals you're missing, the money being lost while you sit here with us." David looked down at his hands, and the terrible truth was that Ethan was right. Even in this moment, this precious, painful moment, part of his mind was calculating the cost of absence, the damage to his reputation, the board's reaction to his unusual behavior. "Yes," he admitted quietly, "and I hate that about myself." Emma reached across the table and picked up the photograph of her grandfather. "What was his favorite thing about you?" "What?" "Your dad. What did he love most about you?" David thought for a long moment. He used to say I had good hands. When I helped him fix things around the house, he'd say I had hands that could build anything." "He was right," Emma said, setting the photo down carefully. "You built an empire. But Dad, we weren't something that needed to be built. We were something that needed to be loved." The storm was beginning to ease, the rain shifting from a violent assault to a steady rhythm. But inside the office, something else was building. A fragile understanding, perhaps, or maybe just the first tentative steps toward forgiveness. The rain had softened to a gentle patter against the windows, no longer attacking, but simply announcing its presence. The storm's fury was spent, leaving behind the clean, fresh scent that somehow managed to penetrate even this high-tech fortress 42 floors above the street. David stood and moved to a cabinet beside his desk, returning with 3 bottles of water and what looked like a small, leather-bound book. "I kept this," he said, setting the book on the table between them. "Every article about your achievements, every honor roll announcement, every mention in the school paper." Emma and Ethan stared at the worn journal. The leather was soft with handling, the edges of pages visible where they had been carefully preserved. "You! What?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "I had Google Alerts set up," David admitted, settling back into his chair. "Every time your names appeared online, I got a notification. School honor rolls, Ethan's baseball statistics, Emma's debate team victories. I printed them all out and kept them in here." Ethan reached for the book with trembling fingers. The first page fell open to a newspaper clipping. "Local twins excel in academic competition." Below it, a photo of him and Emma at age 16, holding certificates and grinning at the camera. "I remember this day," Emma said softly. "Mom was so proud she cried during the awards ceremony." "She should have been," David said. "You placed first in the entire state. I wanted to be there so badly I actually drove to the school. Sat in the parking lot for an hour, just watching other parents walk inside." "Why didn't you come in?" Ethan asked, carefully turning pages filled with evidence of their father's secret vigil over their lives. "Because I didn't earn the right to be proud of you," David said simply. "Pride is for parents who show up to practice, who help with homework, who kiss scraped knees. I was just a stranger collecting evidence that you were amazing despite me." Emma found herself smiling at a clipping from the school paper. "Ethan Morrison leads team to regional championship." The photo showed him mid-pitch, face intense with concentration. "You kept the sports articles too," she said. "Every single one, including the one where you struck out the opposing team's best hitter to win the game." David's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "The reporter called it poetry in motion." "I must have read that article 50 times. Ethan's throat tightened. "I looked for you in the stands that day. After every game, actually. Mom always said you were too busy, but I kept looking anyway." "I was there," David said quietly. "In the parking lot, listening to the crowd cheer. I heard your name over the loudspeaker when you made that final pitch." "Dad!" Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "I know it doesn't count," David said quickly. "Being in the parking lot doesn't make me a father any more than watching from a distance makes someone brave. But I need you to know, I never stopped caring. I never stopped being proud. I just stopped believing I deserved to show it." Emma turned more pages, finding debate team articles, academic award announcements, even a photo from their high school graduation. "You were at graduation." "Last row, baseball cap pulled low. I left before the reception, but I saw you both walk across that stage. Saw you graduate at the top of your class." David's voice grew thick with emotion. "Your mother looked so beautiful that day, so proud, so complete without me." The office felt warmer now, softer somehow. The corporate fortress had transformed into something more intimate, a space where secrets could be shared and wounds could begin to heal. "Mom wasn't complete without you," Emma said gently. "She just got very good at pretending she was." "What do you mean?" Ethan and Emma exchanged one of their twin looks, and this time it carried permission rather than warning. "She kept your wedding ring," Emma said, "on a chain around her neck, under her shirt where nobody could see it. She thought we didn't know, but twins notice everything," Ethan finished. "Even when we were little, we'd catch her touching it sometimes, especially when she was worried or scared." David's breath caught. "She kept it?" "Even in the hospital," Emma continued. "The nurses wanted to remove all jewelry before surgery, but she refused, said it was the only thing that made her feel brave." The revelation settled over David like a warm blanket and a cold shock all at once. Linda had kept his ring, had carried a piece of him close to her heart even after he'd broken it. "There's something else," Ethan said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small silver locket, delicate and old-fashioned, clearly well-loved. "She wanted you to have this." David's hands shook as he accepted the locket. It was warm from being carried close to Ethan's heart, and when he opened it, he found 2 tiny photos. him and Linda on their wedding day, young and impossibly happy. She carried this too, he whispered. Every day, Emma confirmed. She said someday when the hurt wasn't so fresh, she'd give it to you herself. But since she couldn't, Emma's voice trailed off. She wanted you to know she forgave you, Ethan finished. Before she died, she made us promise to tell you that. She said carrying anger was like carrying rocks, and she was tired of being weighed down. David clutched the locket and, for the first time in 6 years, maybe longer, he cried. Real tears, the kind that came from a place deeper than regret or guilt. Tears that washed away the careful control he'd maintained, the professional composure that had become his armor. I loved her, he sobbed. I loved all of you. I still do. I just didn't know how to choose love over fear. Emma moved first, crossing the space between them to put her hand on his shoulder. Then Ethan joined her, and for a moment, fragile and precious, they were a family again. Outside, the sun was beginning to break through the clouds, sending streams of golden light across the office floor. For the first time in years, the future felt possible. The moment shattered like glass hitting concrete. David's phone erupted in a cacophony of alerts. Buzzings, chimes, and the insistent shriek of emergency notifications. The peaceful silence that had wrapped around their reconciliation was obliterated by the sound of his empire demanding attention. Mr. Chen! Patricia's voice burst through the intercom, frantic and breathless. Sir, we have a massive problem. The Shanghai facility, there's been an explosion, 7 people injured, and the Chinese government is threatening to shut down all our operations pending investigation. The stock is in free fall. We've lost 30% in the last hour. David's face went ashen. The locket slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. What? The board is in emergency session. The lawyers are demanding immediate action. If we don't respond in the next hour, we could lose everything. 6 years of expansion in Asia, gone. 12,000 jobs, sir. The reporters are already calling it the biggest corporate disaster of the year. Emma and Ethan watched their father transform before their eyes. The broken, vulnerable man who had just been crying over their mother's forgiveness was disappearing, replaced by the CEO who had chosen his empire over his family 6 years ago. Patch me through to Beijing, David said, already moving toward his desk. Get legal on Conference and find out. Dad! Emma's voice cut through his corporate speak like a blade. Don't! David froze, his hand halfway to the phone. Emma, you don't understand. This could destroy everything. We understand perfectly, Ethan said, standing slowly. The warmth that had filled the room moments before was evaporating like morning mist. We understand that when it really matters, you'll always choose the company. This is different. People are hurt. Lives are at stake. Our lives were at stake. Emma's voice rose, raw with fresh pain. Mom's life was at stake, and where were you? Patricia's voice crackled again. Mr. Chen, the Beijing office is on line 1. The emergency board meeting starts in 10 minutes. David looked between his children and the blinking phone lines, and in that moment, Emma saw the truth written across his face. He was going to choose the company. Again. Take the call, she said coldly, backing toward the door. Save your empire, Dad. It's what you're good at. Emma, please, just give me 20 minutes to handle the immediate crisis, and then... 20 minutes? Ethan laughed bitterly. You think this is a 20-minute problem? You think you can put us on hold like another business call? That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Emma's eyes blazed. Mom was dying for 8 months, Dad. 8 months of chemotherapy and radiation, and nights when she couldn't sleep because of the pain. And you want to know where we were during those 20-minute crises? David's face crumpled. Emma, we were holding buckets while she threw up from chemo. We were working double shifts at minimum wage jobs to pay for her medications because insurance wouldn't cover them all. We were sleeping on hospital chairs because we couldn't afford to hire someone to stay with her. The phones kept ringing. The red lights kept blinking. The empire kept demanding its king's attention. I didn't know, David whispered. You didn't know because you didn't ask. Ethan's composure finally broke. You sent checks we never cashed, but you never called to see if we needed anything else. You never called to see if we were okay. You never called to see if Mom was okay. Patricia appeared in the doorway, her face pale with urgency. Mr. Chen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Chinese officials are threatening criminal charges. We need your immediate— Get out! David roared, his control finally snapping. Everyone just get out! But Patricia's appearance had done the damage. It had reminded Emma and Ethan exactly where they stood in their father's hierarchy of priorities. She's right, though, Emma said, her voice deadly quiet. You do need to take care of this, because this is who you are, Dad. This is who you've always been. The man who chooses business over family every single time. From his jacket pocket, Ethan pulled out a small piece of paper, worn and yellowed with age. You want to know something else about Mom's last days? He unfolded the paper, his hands trembling with anger and grief. This is the last thing she wrote. The night before she died, the nurses found it on her bedside table. David reached for it, but Ethan pulled it back. It's a letter, Ethan continued, his voice breaking. To you. Want to know what it says? Ethan, please. David, Ethan read, I forgive you for leaving. I forgive you for choosing your dreams over our family. But I can't forgive you for not being here when the children needed you most. They are so strong, but they shouldn't have to be. They need their father, and I can't be both parents anymore. Please come home. Please choose them. There's still time. She signed it, Forever yours, Linda. The letter hung in the air between them like an accusation. David's phone rang again, shrill and demanding. She wrote that the night she died, Emma said, tears streaming down her face. She still believed you might come. Even at the end, she still hoped you'd choose us. David stared at the letter, at the evidence of his wife's final, futile hope. The phones kept ringing, the empire kept crumbling, and his children were walking away. I can change, he said desperately. I can be different. Emma paused at the door, her hand on the handle. Can you? Because right now, while your company burns and your children break, which one are you going to save first? The question hung in the air like a verdict, and David, looking at the flashing lights of his phone system, didn't have an answer that wouldn't damn him. The office fell silent except for the incessant ringing of phones and the soft whoosh of the ventilation system. Emma and Ethan stood in the doorway, like ghosts from his past, waiting for an answer to the question that would define the rest of their lives. David stared at the bank of flashing lights on his desk. Line 1, Beijing. Line 2, legal. Line 3, the emergency board meeting. Line 4, probably reporters, circling like vultures around the carcass of his reputation. His empire was burning, and his children were leaving. 40 seconds, Emma said quietly. That's how long you've been standing there, deciding between us and your company. 40 seconds to choose between the children you abandoned and the business that made you rich. The red lights blinked faster, more urgently. Patricia's voice came through the intercom again, barely controlled panic. Mr. Chen, please. The Chinese authorities are demanding an immediate response, or they're seizing all assets. We're talking about bankruptcy, sir. Complete collapse. David's hand hovered over the phone. 6 years of work, 12,000 employees, billions of dollars in stakeholder value. His father's greatest fear made manifest. Failure, poverty, the shame of not being able to provide. But across the room stood his greatest fear made real. Losing his children forever. Dad, Ethan said, and his voice was softer now, almost pleading. Choose. The word echoed in the vast office like a prayer or a judgment. David closed his eyes and saw his father's face. Thomas Chen, broken and bitter at 52, dying convinced he'd failed everyone who mattered. David had spent 30 years running from that image, building walls of wealth and success to protect himself from his father's fate. But what had those walls protected him from, really? From poverty or from love? He opened his eyes and saw Emma's face, so much like Linda's it took his breath away. Saw Ethan's eyes filled with the same hope that had sustained Linda through 8 months of cancer treatments. Saw 2 children who had grown up without a father because he'd been too afraid of failing them to try loving them. The phone rang again. The red light blinked like a heartbeat. Mr. Chen? Patricia's voice was desperate now. Please, sir, we're out of time. David reached for the phone, his hand steady for the first time all day. Emma's face crumpled, and Ethan took a step backward, preparing for another abandonment. But instead of answering, David picked up the phone and did something he'd never done in 15 years of running Chen Industries. He turned it off. Then he moved to the next line and turned that off too. And the next. And the next. One by one, he severed the connections that had ruled his life for 6 years until the office fell silent, except for the sound of his children's breathing. "Dad?" Emma whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. David moved to his desk and opened his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he composed what might be the most important message of his professional life. To the board of directors. Effective immediately, I am temporarily transferring all decision-making authority to acting CEO Patricia Williams. Handle the Shanghai crisis as you see fit. I have a family emergency that takes precedence over all corporate matters. David Chen. He hit send, then closed the laptop and looked at his children. The company will survive, he said quietly. It might not thrive. The stock might crash. I might lose everything I've built. But I lost you once because I was too afraid of failing. I won't make that mistake twice. Emma's composure finally broke completely. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at her father. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, but the man who had just chosen his children over his empire. You turned off the phones, Ethan said, wonder in his voice. All of them, David confirmed. For the first time in 6 years, I'm unreachable to everyone, except the 2 people who matter most. He walked around his desk, past the symbols of his success, past the awards and certificates and photographs with world leaders, until he stood directly in front of his children. I don't know how to be your father, he said, his voice raw with honesty. I don't know how to fix what I broke, or if it can even be fixed. I don't know how to grieve your mother properly, or how to live with the knowledge that I failed her when she needed me most. He took a shaky breath. But I know this. Every choice I've made for the past 6 years has been wrong. Every time I chose safety over love, money over family, fear over faith, I was wrong. And I'm done being wrong about the only things that have ever really mattered. Emma took a tentative step toward him. What about your company? What about it? David asked. I spent 6 years building something to leave you. But what good is an inheritance from a stranger? What good is money from a father you never knew? The storm outside had completely cleared now, leaving the city sparkling in afternoon sunlight. The view from the 42nd floor was spectacular, endless possibilities stretching to the horizon. I want to know about the duck joke, David said suddenly. I want to know what your favorite colors are, and what you study in college, and whether you still like chocolate chip pancakes on Sunday mornings. I want to know if you inherited your mother's stubborn streak or my terrible sense of direction. Emma laughed through her tears. Both, actually. I want to take you to your mother's grave, David continued. I want to tell her I'm sorry, and that I understand now what she was trying to teach me. That love isn't something you earn by being successful. It's something you choose every day, even when you're scared. Ethan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Are you choosing us, Dad? David looked at his son, really looked at him, seeing not the child he'd abandoned, but the man he'd become despite that abandonment. I'm choosing you, he said simply, finally, completely, and forever. 3 months later, David Chen stood in a cemetery in Bellevue, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing jeans for the first time in a decade. The morning air carried the scent of pine and fresh earth, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 9 times. He wasn't alone. Emma knelt beside a simple granite headstone, arranging fresh sunflowers, Linda's favorites, in the built-in vase. Ethan sat cross-legged on the grass nearby, reading aloud from a letter he'd written, his voice carrying easily in the peaceful quiet. And Dad's learning to cook, Ethan was saying to the headstone, grinning. Yesterday, he tried to make your famous lasagna and nearly burned down his kitchen. Em and I had to order pizza and teach him how to use the fire extinguisher. David smiled, settling onto the grass beside his children. The movement would have horrified his old self, A billionaire CEO sitting in cemetery dirt, grass stains on his expensive jeans. But his old self had been a stranger wearing his face. "Your mother always said I was dangerous in the kitchen," he added, placing one of the coffee cups at the base of Linda's headstone. "I used to make her coffee every Sunday morning, and she'd pretend it didn't taste like burned water." "It still does," Emma laughed, accepting the second cup. "Some things never change." "Some things do, though," David said quietly, looking at the inscription on the stone. Linda Morrison Chen, beloved mother, wife, friend. She loved with her whole heart. They'd been coming here every Sunday for 10 weeks now. At first, the visits had been awkward. 3 people bound by blood and grief, but still learning how to be a family. David had felt like an intruder at his own wife's grave, an outsider paying respects to a woman he'd failed to love properly when she was alive. But Emma and Ethan had been patient teachers, sharing memories and stories, helping him understand the woman Linda had become in his absence. They told him about her Tuesday book club, her volunteer work at the food bank, her terrible addiction to reality TV cooking shows. They painted a picture of a life lived fully despite heartbreak, of a woman who had found joy even in his absence. "I brought something," David said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small blue envelope, Linda's handwriting across the front. "I found it in her things. The lawyers gave me her personal effects last week." Emma and Ethan exchanged glances. They'd been through their mother's belongings months ago, before they even knew their father wanted them back. "What is it?" Emma asked. David opened the envelope carefully, as if the paper might crumble at his touch. Inside was a single sheet of stationery and a small key taped to the bottom. "It's addressed to all of us," he said, his voice thick. "To my family, past, present, and future." Ethan moved closer. "Read it." David cleared his throat and began. "If you're reading this together, then my boys found their way back to each other. David, if you're here at my grave with our children, then you finally learned what I spent 18 years trying to teach you. That love isn't something you earn, it's something you choose. Emma, Ethan, your father is a good man who got lost trying to protect you from his own fears. Be patient with him. He's going to mess up the important things and overcomplicate the simple ones. But his heart is in the right place. It always was. David, our children are the best thing we ever made together. They're brave and kind and stubborn and perfect. Love them the way they are, not the way you think they should be. And for heaven's sake, learn to make decent coffee. The key opens a safety deposit box at First National, box 1247. Inside, you'll find letters I wrote but never sent, photos from every milestone you missed, and a recording I made last Christmas. Consider it your cheat sheet for catching up on 22 years of being their mother. But mostly, I want you to know this. I forgive you. We all do. Now forgive yourself and come home. Our children need their father, and I suspect their father needs them even more. All my love, always and forever, Linda. P.S. David, the duck joke still isn't funny, but tell it anyway. They pretend to hate it, but they smile when you're not looking. The silence that followed was broken only by Emma's quiet crying and the distant sound of wind through pine trees. David folded the letter carefully, his hands shaking slightly. She knew, Ethan whispered. Somehow she knew we'd find you. She knew because she knew us, Emma said, wiping her eyes. She knew we were too stubborn to give up on family, even when family had given up on us. David looked at the key in his palm. Such a small thing to hold so much of his life. Do you want to go see what she left us? Together, Emma asked. Together, David confirmed. As they stood to leave, Ethan paused and looked back at his mother's grave. Hey, Mom, Dad finally answered our question. What question? David asked. Emma smiled through her tears. Can we talk? That's what we asked when we showed up at your office. Can we talk? And for 6 years, the answer was no. But today the answer is yes, David finished. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that. We can always talk. They walked toward the parking lot together, not the awkward, careful formation of strangers, but the natural rhythm of family. David had sold his corporate mansion and moved into a modest house 10 minutes from the cemetery, 5 minutes from the coffee shop where Emma worked part-time, and 7 minutes from the community college where Ethan was finishing his teaching degree. Chen Industries had survived the Shanghai crisis under Patricia's leadership, though David's stock value had taken a permanent hit. He remained chairman but no longer CEO, working 3 days a week and leaving every evening at exactly 5:30. The financial cost of choosing family over empire had been significant. The emotional dividend had been immeasurable. "So," Emma said as they reached David's sensible Honda Civic, another change that would have shocked his former self. "Your place for Sunday dinner? I'm making Mom's lasagna recipe. The real one this time. And I'll supervise," Ethan added, "to make sure Dad doesn't burn anything down." David unlocked the car and paused, looking at his children in the afternoon sunlight. Emma, fierce and forgiving, carrying her mother's grace and his own determination. Ethan, gentle and strong, with Linda's laugh and David's stubborn hope. His children, his family, his second chance. "Can I tell you both something?" he asked. "Of course, Dad." "I love you," he said simply. "I should have said it 6 years ago, and 6 months ago, and every day in between. But I'm saying it now, and I'll keep saying it until you believe it." Emma hugged him first, fierce and sudden. Ethan joined them, and for a moment they stood there in the cemetery parking lot, 3 people who had been broken by abandonment and fear, now choosing love over safety, forgiveness over resentment, hope over hurt. "We love you too, Dad," Emma whispered. "Welcome home." After years of broken relationships, what does it take to rebuild trust and find your way back to family? Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply choose love. As they drove toward home together, David began to tell them the worst joke he'd ever heard, something about a duck in a library. And despite themselves, despite everything, Emma and Ethan started to laugh. Some things Linda had been right, never changed. But some things, the most important things, could always be healed.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing than you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.